Inspired by the life of the savvy and ambitious Colombian businesswoman Griselda Blanco comes a new Netflix original limited series. Griselda tells the story of a devoted mother who, with her lethal blend of charm and relentless savagery, creates one of the most powerful cartels in history. Witness Sofia Vergara's captivating transformation into the godmother of the underworld. Griselda, streaming January 25th, only on Netflix.
Girl, real talk. This whole "it's new year, time to reinvent myself" trash is not the vibe for 2024. You can find someone who loves you for you, as you are. You don't need to read a stack of self-help books, only eat sad salads, or start meditating at 5 a.m. to be ready for dating. So yeah, my advice is to download Bumble and find someone who embraces you the way you are right now. Let me know how it goes.
A note to listeners. The following podcast contains content that may not be suitable for all audiences.
I'm thankful Vincent has it. He is very passionate. I haven't got to see him work a case specifically, but I've seen the way he works with families. He always researches the cases. He always gets back to them. He's always very thorough. I see what happens at state a lot of times is there's a reluctance to even try to write maybe a warrant that they know a judge will traditionally deny. So they don't even try it because they just get used to a certain judge, used to a DA. So you don't even see that happen. I see that happen less at the federal level.
You are listening to Partners in True Crime. We are your hosts, Rob and Cindy Dorfman.
Today on the podcast, we are checking back with Darcie Scoon, who we spoke to a while back regarding the Molly Miller and Colt Haynes case, to get her perspective on the BIA taking over the investigation.
Darcie Scoon is a private investigator in Oklahoma who is a certified forensic interviewer. Darcie is also a board member for Marsey's Law in the state of Oklahoma.
Marsey's Law is a national movement that aims to ensure victims of crimes have a meaningful and enforceable constitutional rights in the criminal justice system. Darcie's focus is on serving the Indian country and community.
Today we will also be sharing some information that was given to us by the BIA on how to help this investigation if anyone has tips or leads that can help find some answers, which will be posted at the end of the episode.
That information will also be posted on our website, along with links to the BIA website for the public to access. So if you do know something about the case that you feel is relevant, please contact them immediately.
Now is the time to do this. And the BIA even offers reward money for the information they receive that will help the case. If you know something, call them as soon as you can. Now here's our conversation with Darcie Scoon. Well, listen, thank you so much for coming on here. We wanted to circle back with you because the last time you spoke to Cindy, it's been almost a year, I believe. Yeah. And a lot has happened in this case since that time period. And we have about 32 hours of podcasts, as well as this case has kind of been ping-ponged around through a bunch of different law enforcement agencies and police officers and
some crazy stuff to it.
Exactly. So we wanted to touch base with you to see if you've heard anything about the case, and also to kind of get your perspective and at least what we feel is a good movement in the case with the BIA taking over the investigation.
Okay, is it Marceliano that took it now?
Yes.
Okay, well, I'm really thankful that happened. So I have several cases that have been impacted by McGirt, and the difficulty that I've had is getting state entities to release them. I have one, they're called the Carport murders that I've been working on, if you look them up. And my problem is state does not want to give it to the FBI. They just don't want to do it. And I'm like, you can't,
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to happen.
Why are they doing that?
I don't know. I just don't know. Well, law enforcement has this thing where they want to be the one that solves something. There's been a lot of people who said, I'm going to be the entity that solves this. And then they don't share information. And two of the law enforcement officers involved are related to the suspect. One's the suspect's wife and one's the suspect. I mean, it's just crazy. The whole thing is crazy.
Sounds familiar.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so I haven't had much from Molly. I kind of had to step back and do a little bit. Had several medical procedures done this year, so I haven't got a whole bunch. The last I knew, we needed to search some water with some canine dogs, which I still need to do if they're still doing that. But
yeah, well, just to bring you up to date, then I'll kind of bring you up to date. What's been happening since we last spoke, you spoke to Cindy, is that OSBI took the lead on the case, but at the same point, there were other investigators looking into it, but OSBI has been the major focus. and then there was another officer at a Ringling who did the warrant for the initial search of the ditch area where pretty close to where the car was dumped off, an officer named Jackie Bates, and he's like semi-retired and he's been working on it, and he's still, I think, kind of working on it on a little bit, but I don't think he was working with the OSBI, and now they've been told that BIA is taking the lead on this case, and I don't know if they've given them all the information, but Vincent, who we spoke with, he actually called us last Sunday, and we had a really nice conversation, and was very, very optimistic after what he was telling us what he plans on doing, because I think from the get-go, I think that should have been the place and the home for this case after it ran aground, and there was so many problems. So wanted to hear your perspective on that and how you feel that they're going to handle this case.
I'm thankful Vincent has it. He is very passionate. I haven't got to see him work a case specifically, but I've seen the way he works with families. He always researches the cases. He always gets back to them. He's always very thorough. Even at one point, he and I were talking. He went ahead and took all of the cases, put them in a database, all the MMIW and just MMIW cases in Oklahoma, put them in a spreadsheet, mapped how long it would take based on the office's location they wanted to do and how much time it took away from him actually working, and was requesting a location change for the office based on their number of cases in order to maximize their manpower hours and not be driving. He's very detailed and very focused. That's really a great thing.
Yeah,
and,
I think that's what this case needs, is someone who's detailed and focused. Not that the OSBI wasn't doing that, but I think based upon what we know, they have a litany of other cases in their caseload, and I think it wasn't getting the amount of attention that at this point this case needs. And based upon what Vincent was telling us, it's going to get that, and the fact that they're not going to have to deal with the local politics that are involved as far as trying to get search warrants and local judges and stuff like that. It sounds like there's a pathway to streamline this investigation a little bit more.
Now, did you find out, I'm sure he's going to be filing in are they Eastern District or?
Don't know any about that. We just talked. He called us. I think it was like a courtesy call. He told us that he had listened the entire podcast, as well as all the other information and podcasts and online information that were out there, and that he's going to start from square one. He's going to go back to what the facts are, and the facts are, which we always said, and a lot of people have said, that it all goes back to that car chase, because that's the only the only facts that we have are the car chase, the people who were involved in it, and that where they found the car.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking the Western District of Oklahoma for the feds, which is, I'm trying to figure out if he's filing. I actually think that's where he'd be filing. He might be Eastern, but if it's Western, they have a U.S. ADA named Brandon Hill that is so good, and he's so aggressive, and he's not scared of cases like this. So I'm kind of hoping that's where he's going to be at, because if that's the case, he'll get Brandon Hill, and Brandon Hill is amazing.
Well, that's all we can hope for. I mean, I think it couldn't have happened at a better time. It happened literally at the end of the year, and I think based upon what you're saying and what our first impression is, I mean, the first thing that he said, he goes, listen, I want to be completely transparent. I want our agency to be completely transparent about this investigation. And the fact that he just reached out to us and called us, which we haven't heard from any law enforcement. We actually have invited them to talk to us. So the fact that he's doing that, for us, that's a huge, huge plus, because this case has been kind of shrouded in kind of misinformation and investigations that wasn't really handled properly, like evidence and stuff like that. I think he really understands how important it is to be fully transparent about this case, and I think that's the way he works anyway. So I think that's it's a huge plus for us, for the case.
And I really one of the things I really like him is, so he's Cherokee. I'm pretty sure he's Cherokee. Vincent is, which Molly's Cherokee, I think.
No, she's Chickasaw.
Oh, Chickasaw. Okay. Vincent is Cherokee, but we have a lot of people in law enforcement when all these NIW jobs started coming around that were like, oh, I'm Cherokee or I'm whatever, but they never actually had any dealings in our communities. So nobody really knew who they were. They didn't really have their thumb on the heart of Indian country. They didn't understand what people needed, but Vincent he's involved in our community. He's involved. People knew who he was, prior. People in his tribe knew who he was. So he was already involved in the community. So I think in terms of being a law enforcement hire to work in MMIW, he's just been fantastic because he does care about the community and he is involved, where we have a lot of people just come in, flashing their card, they had no idea, and taking a job that paid well and doing nothing.
And MIW is missing Indigenous women, right?
Yeah, missing murdered Indigenous women, correct. And so that's the unit that Vincent is in charge of, is the MMIW unit. So that unit was originally, so Trump started an Operation Lady Justice, I think was the name of it, and he funded research into MMIW in 13 states. And then the results of that were turned in at the end of 2 years, and then the Not Invisible Act with Deb Hyland started after the Trump one closed, used the information from Trump, and they started opening up these positions. And this is he's on a federal budget to just do MMIW cases. That's all he's doing.
That's great.
So I'm really thankful to hear that he has the case, but it's the Not Invisible Act, I think, that gave him the jurisdiction to take this case. But it was in Indian country, actually, so he could have taken it anyway. But they do have jurisdiction to take MMIW cases from state entities as well. But he's done a fantastic job of prodding other law enforcement agencies who are not doing their job, calling up to find out what's going on. I really like him. He's not scared to say anything. I mean, he's not scared to say something. He's not scared to go forward with something. I really, really like him.
Yeah, and I believe he has some military background too, and a military intelligence, as from what I read about his resume. So the people that I know that have that background have a good way of navigating the labyrinth of government and also other people. Yeah. As we know, that has been a big problem with this case, how it's been passed along to...
Jurisdiction, all of that stuff is a huge issue. Yeah. Do you have a jurisdictional flow chart?
No. Wait,
do you want one?
We would love
one. That would be amazing.
Yeah, I'll send you one. I have one that I have to use all the time. I don't have to use it, but I just always double check it. But I teach law enforcement CLEAT classes. I have CLEAT classes all the time that I teach. So one thing that law enforcement asks me for all the time is, can I get a copy of your jurisdictional
So you actually teach other officers in CLEAT? And for our audience, can you please explain to us what CLEAT is? Because we know what it is, but I don't think anybody else does.
So CLEAT stands for the Council on Law Enforcement Education and Training, and it's specific to Oklahoma. So there's two different types of law enforcement certifying agencies that are used. So like California is a post state, Peace Officer Safety Training and Standards, and then Oklahoma is a CLEAT state. When you teach CLEAT hours, you're basically saying I'm teaching continuing education hours. And I teach a lot on historic trauma, which is specific to communities of color, basically, or marginalized communities. And then I teach a lot of missing persons courses. So I've been working with missing persons since 2010. I used to be a state director of a nonprofit that worked with missing children. And so I've overseen really hundreds of missing persons cases. And now I work with the state chapter of Oklahoma, MMIW, MMIP. And I'm also on the advisory board for Marsey's law here, which is our victims' rights law. I'm on the liaison to Indian country for that, to ensure Native Americans understand the rights that are here. So I've done a lot of work on MMIW and missing persons in Oklahoma. I testified when we put IDA law into practice. We're trying to get it passed by legislation. And so I testified about that. And that was it required law enforcement officers in Oklahoma to have an 8-hour class specific to working missing persons in Indian country.
That's great.
That's great. Fantastic.
Yeah, so it's been great. It did some other things too. One of with the OSBI, it required them to have a liaison, MMIW liaison. But the problem is the bill had funding to come from, the state of Oklahoma, and that was actually amended. And basically they told the OSBI they had to find their own funding, but then approve the bill. So it's been a little bit of a struggle to still get some funding to, provide for that position, but it's not over. It's working. We're seeing some transition. So, slow. It's a slow process.
Yes, I know. Yeah. Good government moves on a geological clock, apparently.
Government moves is actually, I don't know that happens.
It's an oxymoron? Is that an oxymoron?
Might be. I think it might be.
Yeah. I mean, based upon what you know, can you tell us a little bit about the BIA, what you know about them?
So the BIA is the Bureau of Indian Affairs. It started as a war program, actually. They ran residential schools where they took Native Americans and took them to these residential schools and oversaw just anything in Indian country that was related to war. So you have a lot of old programs that were wrapped under the BIA, and then they eventually transitioned to law enforcement. And they have a lot of different social service programs. They're just an entity within Indian country that's funded by federal funds. So they have a law enforcement division. Some tribes use the BIA and they contract with them to do their law enforcement. Some tribes have their own law enforcement.
That would be like something like Light Horse?
Yes. So Light Horse. So actually, what's weird is the Skokie Creek Nation calls their law enforcement Light Horse, and then as well as the Chickasaws call themselves Light Horse. So there's a couple tribes that named their police law Light Horse. But yes, so BIA still has jurisdiction in those, but they take major crimes basically, and then so they can investigate major crimes. And there's a list of major crimes, murder, rape, homicide, human trafficking. So the division that Vincent is with is specifically a new division, BIA, which is for MMIW, missing and murdered Indigenous women.
And that would be classified as a major crime?
Well, missing is not a major crime. Murdered is a major crime. And then, the things that happen to you while you're gone, domestic violence, murder, those kind of things, human trafficking, those would be major crimes. So,
Got it. It's pretty fascinating because, like obviously, I didn't grow up and Cindy didn't grow up in a state where we had these different agencies for Native Americans. So, I mean, the fact
and
that...
I grew up on Long Island where there were a lot of tribes. They didn't have anyone protecting them at that time, which is interesting that, it's great that you guys have that in Oklahoma.
Yeah, I think there's BIA presence in every state, but it's pretty minimal in some states. But even in Oklahoma, so there can be Anadarko, Oklahoma is where the major BIA hub is, which is probably 3 hours from where Molly went missing. Vincent's office is in Muskogee, Oklahoma, which is probably 2.5 hours. He's in Tahlequah, actually. They're right next to each other. But anyway, so, they have offices everywhere, but we still have a 3 to 4 hour response. So they work only on federal trust lands, reservations, tribal property. This particular unit by statute was given the jurisdiction to extend their investigation to missing and murdered women who didn't necessarily go missing on trust land but are Native American. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. Tell us your thoughts about how important it is to have something like BIA, an outside agency that hasn't been kind of caught up in all the stuff and having a fresh pair of eyes to really look at this case from the beginning.
So I think you can answer that on multiple fronts. I think the first thing you could say is it's nice because they can go to federal court, and I do a lot of work in federal court as an investigator, and I can tell you working in federal court in Oklahoma versus working in a county court in Oklahoma when I'm doing cases and going to trial, it's like night and day in the professionalism and the fact that they follow civil rights to the letter of the law. I mean, they're very proactive in protecting victims and rights, whether that's defendants' rights or suspects' rights or, victims' rights. They're fantastic about it. Very professional. So that is one part of the equation, is to have this court system. It's a little bit slower because of all of the cases in there, but I do see that as a major benefit. And then also the BIA, in terms of resources, I think they have some resources in Washington, D.C., but they'll use local federal resources. So crime labs, medical examiners, that kind of stuff. They can use any of the federal labs. So that's really opened up to them. And so that is something that's nice. They just have a different approach to, I see what happens at state a lot of times is there's like a reluctance to even try to write maybe a warrant that they know a judge will traditionally deny. So they don't even try it because they just get used to a certain judge, used to a DA. So you don't even see that happen. I see that happen less at the federal level. They attack warrants and they do a really good job of applying for them. And so I think that is going to be significant in this case. I don't know what kind of technology could be used. One of the things that I always really thought would have been successful is something in Molly's case. It basically where you can determine, it's called sector analysis. And you can write a warrant to a phone company, and you get like this additional column that explains which sector of a cell phone tower phones were hitting on. And you can use it to determine if two people were traveling together, essentially. And so it just narrows down, if you get a 5-mile ping on a cell phone. So I really feel like had they done some sector analysis to see if those phones were moving together or if at some part they split apart, it would have been really helpful. And the feds do that quite a bit. Actually, I've seen that happen in several cases. So I'm kind of hoping that might happen. So I think there's some technology that's going to be available that maybe wasn't available at this day. And I talked to Paula several times about trying to get some sector analysis done. And I ended up talking to somebody for her at the sheriff's department, just kind of explaining it. And I don't think that was ever pursued, because at the time the OSBI had an agent that did sector analysis, and then he retired and they didn't replace him for a long time. They have a guy now that does like a grid analysis. So you grid certain areas on a map, and then you subpoena phone companies to see if their phone was in that grid. So there's that can be done. To my knowledge, none of this has been done for Molly's stuff. I'm really hoping to see some of that transition from some of the resources.
Yeah, we're hoping that they can kind of throw everything in the kitchen sink at this, because it's such at a deficit as far as investigation concerned, because it wasn't handled properly in the beginning, and we're running up on a decade now of information, and how we're at that point where I don't know how long they keep cell phone records and everything, but we're at that crucial point where things can start evaporating evidence.
Yeah, absolutely. So the sector analysis, I've heard it can go, I've heard it could end after 5 years, but I've heard the grid analysis lasts a whole lot longer. So I'm hoping some of those might help do that. And so it's pretty nice, because I think you can take 6 or 7 suspects and put them all on a grid analysis warrant and see if they were all in that area at a certain time. I have a case, that old case right now, it's about 7 years that's currently being done with when they transitioned jurisdictions and agents. And that's the first thing he started doing. So we're waiting on those the responses to come back on that. So I do know that they can do that quite a few years out.
Yeah. Well, that's exciting. That's exciting to hear. 2 things probably need to happen. Obviously, someone who comes forward with some new information that can kind of pinpoint somebody or kind of direct them towards an area where we can find the remains, or the tech version, as you just explained. Because the one thing that we've kind of wrestled with and we've heard happened, that there was a bunch of people, young people, who just disappeared from Facebook and just got off their accounts like the week when Molly went missing. So why would people do that other than if they either have information or something? It just seemed weird. And they were all people that were kind of connected to that area and to Molly and Colt. So I would think that would be a way to at least to kind of find people to talk to. I know that Vincent wants to talk to everybody again. He says everybody needs to be re-interviewed. When the information we were getting from OSBI is that they didn't believe in re-interviewing people, and which
don't. No, they don't.
Which obviously that's the way they do things, if that's the way they do things. But every law enforcement entity and detectives that we've spoken to, even on this podcast, has said, yeah, you talk to them until you get what you need.
Yeah, like all around the world, you talk to them until they tell you they were a lawyer.
Yes. So,
I'm a licensed forensic interviewer, and I can tell you that I'm not, I get frustrated so often. When I first started working, so when I left California, because I was in the Marine Corps, we did all of our training through posts, so peace officer staying through California. And then I came here and I started looking at CLEAT, and I was so disturbed by how old the training material was. CLEAT is just now rewriting stuff they were training that was still the same information from the 90s. I'm like 92.
Wow.
It's crazy to me. And we still have this, the whole thing with interviewing now is you want to make it sound more like a counseling session as opposed to whatever. And I just don't see the people that have the patience to do that, to sit down and be patient and connect with them. And it's just not, it's just not a great set of circumstances. And I would something that I want to have changed.
Girl, real talk. This whole it's new year, time to reinvent myself trash is not the vibe for 2024. You can find someone who loves you for you, as you are. You don't need to read a stack of self-help books, only eat sad salads, or start meditating at 5 a.m. to be ready for dating. So yeah, my advice is to download Bumble and find someone who embraces you the way you are right now. Let me know how it goes.
Listen to the 48 Hours podcast for shocking murder cases and compelling real-life dramas from one of television's most watched true crime shows. Go behind the scenes of each episode with award-winning CBS News correspondents and producers in Postmortem, a weekly deep dive. Listen to 48 Hours wherever you get your podcasts.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit. Since you're trained in that, what is your viewpoint on interviewing a suspect as far as how to elicit information from them when you know they have information and you need to get information from it? As far as you're saying that now it's more of a, for lack of a better term, more of a therapist session as opposed to an interrogation. And
right.
And then how do those results yield? What's the data on how they produce results versus the old way?
Well, one of the major differences is that the good cop, bad cop, lying. I think everybody saw what is that Netflix series, How to Make a Murder or whatever it is.
Yeah.
The horrible interview with the kid, the little nephew that was 14 years old, where everything was suggestive. So you get a lot of false confessions using methods that aren't best practice. And so you get that. And then the other thing is if you have somebody, I've done some training on how to get confessions from people who are narcissists and sociopaths. And I think in this particular case, that's probably needs to be applied because the people involved or suspected to be involved, a lot of them are in law enforcement or related to law enforcement. They very much have a godlike complex, like they're not going to get caught. And so, having somebody who understands what it takes. And I think, I did an 8-hour training on this in particular, and I'm blown away by the difference in confronting somebody who's a sociopath. And one thing, just getting information out of them, because if the information is a lie and you can prove a lie, sometimes that's the best you're going to get with somebody. So you have to know what it is that this person is, really evaluate them, research their friends group. I plan, so if I have to do an interview into a crime, right? I will take the whole situation. I'll plan the whole thing out. The goal is to start with the people that are furthest away from the crime and circle into the people who are the most likely to know information about the crime. And so there's none of that happening. We have none of that. So I think having a very good plan based on whether or not they think they're a sociopath or, they're just somebody who's had a lot of trauma. Because if you have somebody who's been victimized during their life and they've experienced a lot of physical assaults, assaulting verbally or physically that person is just going to make them shut down. They're used to it. But being kind to that person is going to make them respond very differently. They don't know how to deal with kindness. If you smile at somebody, they're probably going to smile back at you. You know what I mean? These things are basic fundamentals. You can be nice to somebody who's committed a crime and be kind to them, and they're much more likely to give you information because you're kind to them. But if you're attacking them, their defenses are just going to go up. So I think they need to make some decisions about whether or not they think they're a sociopath or they think they're somebody who's just shutting down because they're scared, or they need to make those decisions and then kind of plan a route for interviewing.
And on top of that, you're dealing with some of these people have substance abuse problems that factor into that, I would imagine, as well.
Absolutely. And, memory is really impacted by substance abuse. Memory is impacted by trauma. And so doing interviews that trigger memories as opposed to making them shut down and suppress. And I haven't got to do much training on it, but there's a whole training on how to use smells and other types of sensory objects to help trigger memory without destroying the memory. That's the other thing about interviewing is you can alter somebody's memory through the memory process let's say I see this, actually, this is probably the number one thing I see all the time. If you have a victim of domestic abuse who's been gaslit, her or his, for a very long relationship, that person isn't confident, because you know what gaslighting is, but let me explain it. Let me explain it, because, but it's basically when you have evidence, something happens, you're sure it happened, and you confront the person and they tell you you're crazy, right? That's a very powerful dynamic, because they eventually convince you that you don't really know what you know, even though the evidence is right in front of you. So you become less trusting of your own information. And so then these people that get interviewed, that I've experienced, they get interviewed, they've been gaslit, they're a witness, right? They're not a suspect, but they're treated like a suspect in the interview. Then they start to question their own memory. Well, then they're like, well, you're not a good witness because you can't remember. When in reality, you really just triggered some gaslighting problems. And I know in particular, there were some females that were interviewed in Molly's case that sounded to me like they might have been in relationships that they could have been experiencing some gaslighting.
Well, we've had several tipsters call us, which we've actually haven't aired or anything. We've had several of them call us that they were involved with someone who knew was close to the situation, and they have they're no longer with that person, and they're not living in that area. And they started hearing the podcast, and they reached out to us anonymously and said, "Listen, I can't tell you my name, I can't tell you it, but I was there. I was dating so and so. I was living with them, and I heard this and I heard that. I'm sorry I didn't come back, but I was told that if I said anything that they're going to come after me."
Absolutely. And if you haven't done much looking into Oklahoma, we have a significant problems with domestic violence here, significant other homicides. We're often rated in the top 10 in the United States for significant other homicides in Oklahoma. We have a lot of domestic abuse issues here. So it's just something that I think, having heard people that were interviewed, people that spoke, I know who they are. I would suspect that there was a pretty good possibility that their credibility was attacked, or, it was it was a hostile interview when it should have been an interview and not an interrogation. And it probably didn't pan out well, simply because of that. So I see that happen. So I can't even tell you how many times a week I can be like, oh, well, that just happens. It's a frustrating experience. So I think there was a lot of gaps in Molly's investigation, so many gaps. And I suspect that better interview processes would have yielded better interview results.
Yeah, I agree. And I think Vincent obviously has his hands full with the amount of data that has been collected on this case. And, and who knows the percentage of what amount of the data is significant and reliable, because it's been floating around for so long.
And there's so much of it. There's just so much. I mean, we've talked about this before, where it's just endless. The good thing is that he's determined to get an answer, and I could hear it in his voice. And that gives us a lot of hope for this case. And we're very excited that he is on it. And he wants tangible evidence. So if he is going to go back and start re-interviewing people, and he's skilled in that and knows how to do it properly, I think we're in a good place.
Yeah. No, I think it would be great for him. I mean, that's what I do with old cases. Like, I sit down, read the whole thing, look at who was interviewed, try and plan an re-interview process. I mean, it's difficult. And I know I have more knowledge about this than the public, but I know that I don't know as much as, her family, who's kept track of this and kept this alive. And it's kudos to them for getting it to the point that it is now. But
yeah, I mean, Paula, every time we talk to her, there's new information that she doesn't even know she remembers. It's like, I'll come up, someone will float a name to me, and I'll get on the phone and go, who is this person? And then she's like, I don't know. And then all of a sudden she goes, wait. And then she accesses this part of her brain, and then just spills over, and she goes, I have a text from someone somewhere, I'll find it. And she'll find it, and she'll go find it. And she's, this is who this person is. Who are they connected to? And so it's fascinating to watch, but also excruciating as far as trying to pinpoint information in people.
Well, and then it's horrible because Vincent somehow has to get all that information now and read everything. So, I mean, I don't know how many weeks he's looking at being buried under just reading back reports. It's going to be crazy for him.
Well, yeah. I mean, he told me, he says he was I guess he has to cover a lot of ground. He was on a 16-hour drive somewhere. And he goes, that's when he listened to most of the podcasts. And I thought it was very adept at him to kind of say, listen, let's see what this information is. Whereas other law enforcement agencies, we would ask you, well, are they hearing some of the information we're putting out there? I mean, are they going to look into this? I mean, they wouldn't even listen to it. It was almost like their pride was preventing them from getting information. They just assumed if it's on a podcast, and they even so much as to said to Paula that the podcast is hurting the investigation.
Yeah, that's something I hear a lot too. That's just, it's going to hurt, or it's going to do this, or it's going to do that. And there is a point that I think people can say, I think you can attack too much initially. You can attack law enforcement, or you can attack this, or you can attack that. But sometimes it just gets to the point where, in this case, it's so many years old, it's not been treated appropriately from, the beginning. And so sometimes that's just what has to happen.
And there's no one's being attacked here. We're just stating facts.
No, I mean, I'm sorry, let me clarify. Like, I have families that when they first get like a missing persons case, they'll be upset because they're not getting information. So I just had a case where this family attacked law enforcement every day and posted all these videos on TikTok talking about what a horrible job they were doing. But they weren't actually speaking to law enforcement. So it was based on assumption. And I was like, that is like TikTok videos in a defense attorney's hand at the very beginning of a criminal, like, it's just not something you want to do. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I try to get families to not do that. Like, if you want to produce information, that's fine, but don't do anything specific. But
yeah, I can understand that perspective, because like in the Idaho killings that just happened, the family, one of the fathers wasn't happy with how fast things were going. And we're talking weeks here. We're not talking like 10 years like this case. And he hired a private investigator. But that was a totally different situation. That was an example, because we have friends who are boots on the ground down there who are looking into this case, law enforcement and former law enforcement. And they all said the same thing. They said the reason why this happened so quickly and they found him is because everybody worked together. The state, local, and federal law enforcement all shared information. They worked together. They worked with the other out-of-state agencies and state troopers and stuff like that. And that's why it happened. Whereas this has been just a cacophony of people just holding on to information and not sharing it. We found out that the OSBI didn't have all the FBI files, and the FBI had files that they had told Paula to do a FOIA request on to see, because they specifically said, there's stuff in here you need to see. So it's like, when you have that, because they knew that she wasn't going to see it from anybody else.
Yeah.
So that's concerning. So you have one example in the Idaho where they all worked together and they found the guy. They found him.
Yeah.
And preserve the integrity of the investigation, and they're going to have a solid trial and hopefully a conviction. But this is a totally different, where it wasn't handled from the get-go. And
this exposure, because of how, here's the thing, if the worst happens and we never have resolution, like, people need to lose their jobs and people need to be held accountable for the way they did this. I always want it to be resolved, but they just don't want to be accountable. There are things that hurt, but this is, I would say, Paula, so I've worked with hundreds of missing persons families. I would say Paula was one of the best I've ever seen at never saying more than she needed to. Paula keeps it very close to the chest. She's always kept it close to the chest, which is why I don't think anything she does is destroying it, and just holding people accountable is important. But Paula has always kept it close to the chest.
Yeah.
Yeah. And she wants people to be accountable, and she does want to work with law enforcement, always has from the beginning. She's always turned evidence over. She's always done the right thing. And yet it doesn't seem to matter. They still come after her. And that's what's wrong.
Yeah. They spend more time arguing with her than just
It's insane.
Yeah.
What goes on.
I don't get it.
And it's wrong. And it's not the way it should be.
It's not how you treat victims' families and stuff like that. And also it's bad optics to allow a victim's family to see that underbelly of process of the mismanagement of the case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And then there was vying agencies trying to one up things. It's been a frustrating experience for her, I know it has been.
Yeah, but I have to say she is very thankful that the BIA is involved. She's very hopeful. Like she said before, she goes, nothing would make me happier than just to sit back and watch. I don't want to have this burden. I've had this burden on me for 9.5 years. I don't want to, I don't know any of these people. I didn't live in that area. I don't want to know them.
Nobody should have to be responsible for investigating their own loved one's murder.
No.
And that's the position that Paula was put in.
Yeah. This has been awesome, Darcie.
You're awesome, Darcie.
And then very happy that you're continuing your work. It sounds like you're doing some amazing work trying for some of these victims' families. I wanted to hear more a little bit about that other case you're talking about. What is it called?
The carport case?
The carport case?
Mm-hmm.
And that sounds very interesting, and we just applaud what you're doing, and we're thankful that there are people out there doing what you're doing.
So this is a little, thank you, I appreciate it, but this is a little off the subject, but have you looked at the fact that the DOJ is investigating the entire gamut of Oklahoma law enforcement for their response to mental health calls right now? Yeah. So it started with Oklahoma City Police. The DOJ came in and they were going to go and investigate Oklahoma City's police response to mental health. And now they're going to investigate the whole state for law enforcement's response to mental health.
Isn't that something being done nationwide, though, in a lot of cities and states where they're, the different approach to law enforcement, and they're trying to, I know they do in Los Angeles, that they have teams of,
I don't know, but we're being investigated because of our response. I don't know, like our lack of appropriate response to mental health is what we're being investigated for. So I don't know what they're doing in Los Angeles, but ours is because our mental health response has been subpar.
Well, it's tough. I mean, it's tough. It all comes down to training.
Yeah, and if they're being trained from 1992, it's time to update things.
Yes. No, I do know they have hired somebody to rewrite that, and he is in the process of rewriting it. I don't know that it's out yet, and they've had some updates. But at the time that Molly went missing, they certainly hadn't started rewriting it yet.
Like I said, I think everyone we've talked to said it's down to training. A lot of the officers and deputies in that area, and also around all over the country. I mean, I don't think they get the proper training and then retraining to handle these situations, these investigations. And a lot of it has to do with just money as far as providing that. And I know a lot of these rural communities like Love County, I mean, they don't have a huge pool of people qualified people to choose from. But training saves, I mean, it may cost money, but it's going to save you money.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, and then Carter County, Murray County, Love County, they're all three right next to each other. They're adjacent to one another. All three of them within a year or two of one another had their own sheriffs for the county arrested for some type of malfeasance. That's a pretty strong statement when you have three adjacent counties, three sheriffs arrested or dismissed because of different types of malfeasance, and I'm pretty sure a couple of them were charged. I'd have to go look specifically, but.
And then you have the current investigation into Chris Bryant's office about the bugging, which is, we haven't heard any updates on that, but we spoke to the attorney who actually discovered the bug. He's an Ardmore local attorney, and he was dumbfounded. It's a problem. It's like that's one of the things that has shrouded this case from day one. They feel like everybody's sweeping things under the rug and they just want it to go away.
Yeah, absolutely. And now it's become this huge, it's gotten larger as it's grown. And so now they have this huge fireball. And now it's not necessarily that they want to sweep it away as much as they are so overwhelmed that they prefer to sweep it away because it's too overwhelming for them to take a good look at it.
Yeah. And the powers that be that were involved, obviously Joe's out of the picture. He's not a sheriff anymore.
Right.
And the local DA there, he's retiring this year. So, everybody is kind of going to the hills, and then you're going to have witnesses dying and moving on. I think a couple people have already passed on.
Yeah.
And so the longer this case kind of languishes, the harder it gets.
Yeah.
But it's great now that we have the BIA involved and that Vincent's taking the reins on this, and I feel really good about that. I feel like this is...
Yeah, it's a fresh start.
It's a fresh start.
I do. I'm really glad about that. I'm glad about a lot of things. I was going to tell you what the other thing about him taking over the case is because he has that national jurisdiction. They have BIA units everywhere and federal, like FBI everywhere. So they're not going to have to be hunting down witnesses 6 or 7 states away like we were saying with state jurisdiction.
So they work in collaboration with the FBI as well?
They work in collaboration with the FBI, but they also are national. So they have a bunch of offices everywhere. So they have agents everywhere. They have a lot in Mexico or New Mexico, Arizona. Vincent's office is actually, his supervisor is out of Dallas. So they have a national network of officers. So Vincent's not going to have to chase down people for interviews. So that's another great thing.
That's fantastic.
That's wonderful.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. And people who are in federal prisons. That's what the Carport murders. There's a person in federal prison that I really need to speak to, but I can't get into federal prisons. I can get into county jails, but I can't get into prisons. And
why can't you get into federal prison?
I have to have a judge's order. And in this particular case, I'm not working. I can get a judge's order if I'm working for the defense, but I can't, or the DA, but
got it.
I it as a private party. So we have people that are in a federal prison that need to be interviewed, but the state just is not making any effort to do it.
Got it. Understood.
And it's, like Nevada or somewhere, I can't remember. So, that's good because they have this national presence that they can hunt down anybody that they need to.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Especially in this case, because people have scattered.
Yes.
They did.
People have, have. And so that'll be an advantage as well. I'm excited about it.
Yeah, we are too. And we're excited to talk to you again. And like I said, thank you for all the work you do, and love to talk to you more about some of the stuff you do. I think it's pretty amazing, and keep on doing it.
Yeah, just let me know if you need anything. And I sent those jurisdictional flowcharts to you.
Oh, awesome. Thank you, Darcie.
Fantastic. Okay. Do you mind if we put those up on our website?
Yeah, they're on the DOJ websites. And the Department of Justice has the flowchart. I think the link is, the website link is on the actual thing. But yeah, you can put them on there. It's fine.
Fantastic. Just for, a lot of our listeners, they want to, they love this information. And I think a lot of people are getting educated on how their area of the, especially as people in the Love County, Carter County area, we get a lot of questions from them because they want to learn more about what's going on in their area and how it's being treated. And I think a lot of it has been just kind of thwarted and shadowed to them. And I think this case in the podcast has brought to light a lot of the way things have been done down there. And because a lot of people didn't have anything bad to say about Joe Russell until they started seeing all the stuff that he was doing. They just assumed that everything was being swept under the rug. And it was, so I think it's important that people know who they are dealing with and the crimes that are around their neighborhood and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So let me just explain one thing about the flow chart. So McGirt, a lot of people get confused about McGirt. So this flow chart was true before McGirt. It was the exact same. The only thing that McGirt did is say half of the state was an Indian reservation, making it federal land. Now, if you're native on that half of the state, this flow chart impacts you. And before McGirt, it didn't impact you unless you were on trust property.
Interesting.
I don't know if that was too abstract or if that's...
No, I think he explained it. I think
clear.
when you look at it, I think people will understand all of that. But I had no idea there was a flow chart. So that's cool to know.
Yes, I have to send it to people all the time in law enforcement. So they're like, what am I doing? Yeah.
Well, fantastic. Well, listen, thank you for your time. We appreciate your time, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Darcie.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.
Next time on Partners in True Crime.
Our investigation into the case of Molly Miller and Colt Haynes continues. We're going to be sorting through tips, and we are going to be speaking to new experts in law enforcement and the legal field from around the country who will hopefully help us unravel this mystery.
If you have any information regarding the case, please contact the BIA at www.bia.gov/BIA/missing-murder-unit.
You can also call their hotline with tips at 1-833-560-2065 and email them directly at ojs_mmu@bia.gov.
And if you want to text them with a tip, text keyword BIA-MMU and send your tip to 847-411.
Check the Partners in True Crime website for this and any additional information.
If you or anyone you know is suffering from a methamphetamine addiction, please contact the American Meth Addiction Hotline.
If you or anyone you know has been the victim of sexual abuse, please contact the National Domestic Violence Hotline. All rights reserved. This has been a production of 722 Media Content. Please visit our website where you can subscribe to the podcast, find show notes, and listen to Vi's original song, Take Me Back, written for Molly Miller.